Okay, welcome back. Let's continue from where we left off.
Chapter 28, Izuku lived in limbo for a few days after that. It was quiet. Very quiet, in fact. So much so that Aizawa was getting very suspicious of the class. And Izuku could tell it wouldn't be long until the truth came out. He only hoped he could hold it off a bit longer. But in these days of limbo, Izuku had plenty of time to think. He even had his first mandatory therapy session. Well, it wasn't a session. It was the suicide assessment Nezu had told him about. The questions were standard as always, and Izuku took his time explaining that, no, he wasn't suicidal anymore. Yes, he was at one point. But he moved on. He had a support system. He was okay. He even followed along with the promise sheet his therapist had pushed towards him. Before Izuku left that day, he had a slip of paper with the names of 3 individuals he promised to reach out to if he ever felt like harming himself or others again. His mother, Shinsu, and All Might. They were the first he could think of, but also the first ones he had cell numbers for. Speaking of All Might, the man was Izuku's savior 4 days after the dreaded cafeteria incident. It seemed that Aizawa was finally tired of being kept in the dark, and he knew exactly which student to go to for answers. Midoriya, stay after class, Aizawa said quickly almost as soon as the bell had rung for the end of the day. Izuku sighed heavily then, setting his bag down on his desk. Go on ahead, I'll probably be a while. He explained to Tokoyami and Shoji as they paused in their trek out the door. They hesitated, but with Izuku's pleading eyes and Aizawa's stern gaze they knew not to try to resist. That's where All Might came in. Aizawa had just made Izuku the subject of that stare when the blonde symbol of peace barged in as he was wont to do. I am here. With a request to speak to Midoriya, he announced, and Izuku's lip quirked in a small smile. Get in line. I have several questions for him. Aizawa said immediately, rolling his eyes as All Might deflated. I was actually wanting to talk to him about inheriting my quirk. All Might told him, rubbing the back of his neck. I promised him he would have it before the sports festival, and I'd rather not give it to him the day of. Aizawa looked visibly conflicted at that. Izuku did not doubt that he wanted to have his word first, but when it came to the importance, well, All Might took the cake. Fine, Aizawa sighed as he pulled one of the chairs over to Izuku's desk. You can go first. All Might quickly followed his lead as he grabbed a chair as well. Great. There was a moment of silence as he seemed to gather his thoughts. One for all is very dangerous to wield, my boy, was his big opener. It came naturally to me, but I was in peak physical health and had been training my body for quite a bit longer than you for it. How much longer? Izuku asked hesitantly. He knew he wasn't in the best of shape even still. He was a healthy weight, but all the muscle he had taken time to build up was all but gone. He was working out, of course, as much as he could. But progress was always slow. Years, at least. All Might doesn't attempt to lie. He was a natural when he finally got a hold of it. Nana said fondly. And Izuku's eyes flickered to see her sitting mid-air beside them as if she had pulled up a chair as well. Oh, speaking of dash, All Might awkwardly motioned to Izuku's eyes. That. I've been doing some speculation on what exactly One for All would do for your quirk. This, Izuku perked up at. He had done a lot of his own speculating in the notebook he handed to Aizawa, of course. But this was coming from All Might, who had first-hand experience with One for All. All Might seemed to smile at his enthusiasm. I believe that One for All could offer you an alternate source of power for your quirk. That way you won't be shorting out all the electronics around you. But, All Might was quick to interject. It would be dangerous. Like plugging too many cords into one outlet. Add too much dash. And you'll short circuit. Aizawa interrupted as he gathered where the line of thought was going. All Might nodded. Exactly. So, You're saying I shouldn't use One for All at the sports festival? Izuku summed up, feeling somewhat disappointed. He had been looking forward to showing off a bit but also looking forward to strengthening his bond with Nana. All Might looked hesitant for a moment. Not exactly. The confusion must have shown on both of their faces as he continued. The best way to gain control of One for All is to use it. See how it feels. Adapt it to your style. Etc. So, yes. I think you should use it at the sports festival. But not when in combat with other students, Aizawa said quickly. There are several other activities that won't put your fellow classmates in danger. You can use those to work on your quirk. Right, Izuku said, feeling the excitement building once more. He was practically bouncing in his seat. And Nana seemed to share his energy. Oh come on, Toshinori. Stop teasing the boy, she chuckled. Brushing up against All Might's back, causing him to flinch. This seemed to be exactly what he needed to get his thought process back on track. So, the only thing left is to give it to you. He turned to Mr. Aizawa. I don't suppose you have anything to add. I expect you to be smart about this. I know you're excited and I don't blame you for that. But I'm serious when I say that this could hurt someone as well as yourself if it goes wrong. So when you train, it's under my supervision as your teacher. Understand? Aizawa meant business. Yes, sir. Izuku swore. Good, so how does this work exactly? Aizawa asked, facing All Might. What neither of them expected was for All Might to reach up and pluck a hair from the top of his head. Eat this. Oh my Toshinori, why would you? Nana cut herself off with a laugh as Izuku and Aizawa traded disgusted looks. Hey now. All Might said. My DNA needs to be inside your body for the transfer to happen. Do you have any better idea? His face flamed red with embarrassment. Aizawa gave him a dumbfounded face. As if he couldn't believe All Might would ask such a thing. We have a fully equipped medical office, and you want him to swallow a piece of your hair. Nana, please tell me you didn't make him eat your hair. Nana's laughter grew louder. And no. She snickered. It was just blood. He was pretty squeamish at the time too. Can we just use your blood? Izuku asked hopefully. Before All Might could respond, Aizawa stood up. We are definitely using blood. Come on. I'll text Joe and tell her we're on our way. A piece of hair. Aizawa scoffed as he walked to the door. Unbelievable. Nana eventually got herself under control as they entered Recovery Girl's office. And she already had a small metal tray laid out with what seemed like everything they needed. Really, All Might? A hair. She pointed out as soon as they stepped in. Honestly, you'd think you'd never heard of sanitization. Both of you sit down. She motioned to the chairs beside her. It was a quick process, all things considered. Recovery Girl slipped an IV into All Might and Izuku's arms with practiced ease. Grabbing a syringe, she slipped it into place inside the IV and slowly started to withdraw blood. When she filled up the syringe, she disconnected it from the IV and turned to Izuku. This will make you feel very warm. Possibly even feverish. But we can't wait for it to cool to your natural body temperature. Izuku nodded as he offered his IV to her, taking a deep breath. Recovery Girl was right. It did feel warm. It almost felt like it was burning as his body accepted the blood. Nana whispered words of encouragement to him as he felt his body circulate the blood through his heart. It burned even then. Almost so much that he didn't even notice as Recovery Girl extracted his IV. Are you alright, problem child? Aizawa asked worriedly as Izuku raised his head to look at the ceiling. It's hot. Izuku comments. When do I know if it takes? He asked All Might, looking for a distraction. A few hours mostly. It's seeping into your DNA right now. Rather than ingesting it, we put it into your bloodstream. So it may not take as long. Either way, it'll take some time. You should go home and rest. Izuku nodded in agreement as he went to stand up. His knees knocked together weakly as he felt sweat gathering on his brow. Aizawa was quickly by his side then, offering him a supportive hand on his back. I'll get Nedzu to get you a ride home. Do you want me to call ahead to your mother? Immediately Izuku shook his head. No, I'm fine. I'll go home and lay down. I'll tell her it was a hard day of training or something. She won't ask questions. If you're sure. I am. No matter how sure he was, Izuku took one step towards the door and shuddered. The action of moving changed his heart rate from resting to active and the pump of blood was scorching in his veins. He needed not to take another step before two strong arms wrapped around him. All right, I'm accompanying you home, Aizawa said immediately, and Izuku couldn't find it in himself to disagree anymore. Can I have some water? He asks instead and mutters a small thanks as a plastic straw was pressed to his lips. The water was room temperature, which Izuku wasn't too fond of. But even he knew ice water wouldn't be good for him at the moment. A minute passed and he felt more grounded. Are you ready now, problem child? Oh, yeah. There was a hand on his back ready to catch him if he stumbled, which thankfully didn't happen as the trio walked out of the doors to the gates where a sleek black car waited. All Might rushed ahead to open the door for Izuku to crawl in. Send me a message after you get some rest to let me know you're alright, will you? Izuku hummed. The heat had mostly abated, leaving him just feeling tired. Maybe a bit like he had sipped warm tea. Rest, sweetie. Nana cooed, brushing a hand over Izuku's forehead before he flinched at the increased warmth. Sorry dash. I'm trying to. Izuku let his head loll to the side as Aizawa moved to sit next to him. It seemed Izuku's muttering was unusual to Aizawa. Trying to what, Midoriya? The man asked curiously. Sleep. There was a quiet "oh" that sounded from where Aizawa was sitting, but Izuku found himself falling asleep almost immediately after. The distance from Izuku's home to UA isn't that long by car. But as Izuku felt his shoulder being touched, he feels as if he's being woken from an hour-long nap. He must make some kind of noise of protest because Aizawa's voice rumbles in a chuckle. I know, kid. I wish I could nap right now too. But you're home now. I'm sure your mom is waiting for you. Mention of his mother was the only thing that kept Izuku from falling back asleep. Instead, he forced his sluggish limbs to scoot out of the car seat to stand beside Aizawa. The same arm from before came to support him once more. Only this time, Izuku leaned more into it. Aizawa didn't waver as he practically carried Izuku up to his doorstep and knocked. Oh. Izuku what dash his mother stuttered as she opened the door and seemed to take in what Izuku could only assume was a troubling sight. He's alright, ma'am, Aizawa assured. I noticed he seemed a bit sluggish this morning, but I thought nothing of it. During training, he developed a fever and I had him rest in the nurse's office for the rest of the day to make sure this wasn't from before. Izuku was nudged gently and he found himself moving on instinct until he was leaning onto his mother. Her familiar scent filling his nose with home and safety. So you're sure he's alright? Perfectly. Recovery girl says fatigue is normal after traumatic bodily events. He just needs some rest. I'll get him to sit out of training as well for the next few days. Aizawa was a smooth liar. Izuku was impressed as he felt his mother's shoulder relax from its tensed position. Thank you for escorting him home then, his mother said happily. Can I offer you some coffee or tea? Aizawa respectfully declined, insisting he had to do dash something. Izuku stopped paying attention as he pretty much fell asleep standing up. He didn't remember walking into his room or taking his uniform and shoes off before laying down on his bed. But that was where he ended up some time later. Passed out, and sleeping dreamlessly. An unimaginable power coursing through his veins. Chapter 29. Izuku wasn't sure how long he had been asleep. Or if he could even really call it sleep. He could feel himself laying in bed. He could feel the blankets on top of himself. He was warm. His arms were resting above his head on his pillow. His breathing was slow. His eyes wouldn't open. There were voices. Not around him, but he could hear them. Was he dreaming? Been so long dash. I know. But you're back and dash. The voices faded in and out. Izuku tried hard to listen to them. Look at him. He'll be perfect dash. He'll have to build up those muscles again dash. That won't take long dash. As far as recognition, Izuku couldn't recognize any of the voices. Only that they were gradually getting louder. He felt his head turn on the pillow, his cool cheek pressing against the warm fabric. "Shhh, you'll wake him. Let him rest." That was Nana's voice at least. And Izuku felt her hand running over his hair gently. Yeesh. I haven't seen you this protective since you first bonded to One for All. Izuku shifted again, legs stretching out before relaxing once more. Lay off of her. She's just being a mom dash. Don't wake him. Nana sounded annoyed now. There's plenty of time to talk later. This continued. The voices fading in and out. Not always comprehensible. Nana always came in to quiet them if they got too loud. But eventually, Izuku found himself blinking away. His room was pitch dark except for the sliver of light creeping in from under the door. Sluggishly, he sat up and reached for his lamp. As before, when his eyes took on their milky white form, the provided light did little to aid in his vision. But he could see Nana sitting on the end of his bed. I told them not to wake you up, she sighed, standing and walking over to him. They're just really excited to meet you. Meet me? Who? Izuku rubbed his eyes and yawned. What time is it? It's been about 4 hours, kiddo. It's pretty late, but your mom is making dinner for you. At that, Izuku felt his stomach grumble. He almost forgot what he had asked before, that is until he heard the voices again. They were much quieter now. Whispers. He really had to pay attention to understand what they were saying. Come on now, Nana. Stop hogging all the attention. Yeah. It's been too long since we last had someone new to talk to. Izuku turned his head to each side trying to see who these voices were coming from, but there were only the two of them. Hello. Hello there, #9. Up and at 'em. Izuku was speechless as he heard murmuring coming from all over his mind. Now that he was awake, he could only really pick up 3 distinct voices other than Nana. Everything else besides that was almost like white noise. Nana, I can't see any of them. Well, that's because they aren't, like me. She tried to explain but was interrupted. Mama Bear number 7 just can't let the past go, a voice. Izuku felt like it was a sneer, but he didn't know the voice enough to say if it was a joke. Shut it, number 5. She can stay as long as she feels she needs to. It's been decades. And it'll be decades more. Izuku flinched at the anger in her voice. Something was going on that he wasn't a part of, obviously. Are they the holders of the past? Izuku asked as he stood, immediately heading for his desk where his OFA notebook sat. Damn right we are. Number 5 here. But you can call me Daigora. Izuku flipped to a fresh page and wrote his name at the bottom of it. Daigora. Number 5. #6. You can call me Sensei. Izuku nodded as he wrote them down. He would need a while to get used to all these new voices, of course. #4. You can call me #4. Izuku couldn't help but notice that the higher up on the predecessor list, the harder it was to hear their voice. After number 4 spoke, he found himself waiting for more, but there was only the dull humming. He left space, of course, he knew there were others. but for the moment he set his pencil down. Number 4, 4, M. Daigoro, 5, M. Sensei, 6, M. Shimura Nana, 7, F. All Might, 8, M. Midoriya Izuku, 9, M. Introductions out of the way, for now, you should go see your mom, sweetie, Nana urged, brushing against his back. She's worried for you. I'll never understand these mothers. They worry too much. We can handle ourselves just fine, can't we? Number 9. It took Izuku a moment to realize Daigoro was talking to him, but when it clicked, Izuku felt offense on his mother's and Nana's behalf. They just want to show that they care, Izuku muttered as he took a second to gather control over his eyes and headed for his door. There was the start of a protest, but it was muted suddenly in a wave of warmth before Nana's hand on his back urged him forward. Izuku's mother was spooning out a bowl of some sort of soup in the kitchen. After filling it, she set it down on a tray and poured a tall glass of water. It was obvious from Izuku's view she felt like he was still sick and wanted to bring him dinner in bed. It was a sweet gesture and Izuku found himself smiling at that. Hey, Mom. Inko turned quickly at his voice and a relieved smile took over her face. Izuku. I was just about to wake you up. Come. Sit. Let me get the thermometer. She took the bowl of the tray and set it on the table for him to eat. Izuku watched her shuffle around before finding the thermometer. How are you feeling? A lot better. Izuku gave her a genuine smile. I guess I just worked too hard too soon. I'll take it easy from now on. By the look on his mother's face, she was surprised at his concession. Oh. She came over and pressed the thermometer to his forehead and he let her. Yeah. I need to get into shape for the sports festival, but I'll ruin my chances if I push too hard too soon. As the thermometer beeped, he took his first bite of soup and hummed as it warmed him up in the best way. Your fever is still a little higher than average, his mom noted. But it's a lot better. Oh. Izuku finally remembered something. Since the sports festival is coming up, could I bring some friends over to watch some of the past events? So we can be prepared and all that? He asked, practically buzzing with excitement. Her amazement only grew as Izuku could see her eyes glistening. Oh, of course. Of course, you can have friends over. How many, what are their names? I'll make sure to prepare snacks. She went on in a rant, finally extinguishing the last bit of worry and tension that sat on her shoulders. Is it the same kids from before that walked you home? No actually. Izuku forced himself to keep a smile so that her happiness didn't waver. It's Shinsu, remember him? And my friends Tokoyami and Shoji. She didn't seem too bummed. If anything, she was excited about the idea of more friends. As she babbled on about snacks and drinks and reminding him to get their parents' permission, Izuku took the time to tell her about them. About how they have mutant quirks and how they face discrimination because of it. Luckily, Inko was never one to look down on mutant quirks. She saw them as human just as she was. But she understood the sensitivity of the issue. As he finished his soup and thanked his mother for it, Izuku took his phone out and sent several texts. One letting All Might know he was alright, one to Shinsu, Shoji, and Tokoyami to ask their parents if it was alright, and one to All Might again to tell him that Ofa took. He was now the 9th holder of One for All. _____. Getting used to more voices was easier than Izuku had thought it would be. However, he could only assume this was because Nana had some control over it. Several times when he found his concentration wavering from all the words thrust at him, they disappeared suddenly before Nana was urging him back to his school work. If Izuku had to describe the feeling of Ofa, he would compare it to a live wire. The live wire being himself before Ofa. Unrestrained. All or nothing. Very dangerous. But now he felt like he was grounded. Ofa restrained his powers to a more manageable level, allowing himself to access them as he wanted. Of course, he didn't try to test it out for himself, but it was obvious in the way his eyes stopped flickering at random. Which was great, seeing as how that was hard to hide from his mother. It was only a few more days until the sports festival, and much to Izuku's disappointment, he hadn't had much practice with his new power. Not for lack of trying, however. It was just that he had other classmates to worry about, and Aizawa wasn't able to dedicate that much time to him during regular school hours. That would change today, however. Aizawa had told them the day before that they would be split between several of their teachers for one-on-one lessons. Everyone was grateful for that, but also excited for the sports festival practices they would be doing while they waited for their turns. This is the best time for you all to learn your quirks as well as each other. The student sitting beside you could either be your ally or your enemy at the sports festival. Be smart. So the class was buzzing with excitement. Izuku was glad to see Shoji and Tokoyami waiting for him outside the locker room. They even seemed to be holding their overnight bags so they could come to his house right after the sports festival marathon. Hey, guys. Hello, Midoriya, Tokoyami greeted, and Izuku watched as one of Shoji's tentacles turned into a mouth to smile at him. Are you excited as I am? Of course we are, they chorused together. They all changed into their gym uniforms and headed outside. Coincidentally, they were led to the same field where they were taken during the quirk tests on their first day at UA. Now, however, there were many more teachers there and various objects set up. There was a rock wall, some tumbling mats, and even a set of bars that looked to be either used for pull-ups or balance. As for the teachers, there was of course Mr. Aizawa, All Might, and Present Mike, but Izuku could also see Midnight and Ectoplasm as well. Now that you're all here, Aizawa sighed as if they had kept him waiting. We will begin by calling students over one by one. You will go with the teacher that we feel will best help you develop your quirk. Everyone else can train on the obstacles we have set up here. However, Aizawa's voice hardened and everyone seemed to stop breathing in anticipation. You are not allowed to spar until a teacher is free to supervise. If we see any of you using your quirks against each other with no supervision, I will not hesitate to pull you from the sports festival completely. Do I make myself clear? There was a chorus of yes, sir, throughout the class, and Aizawa nodded in satisfaction. Good. First up, Shoji, you're with Ectoplasm. Satu, with All Might. Aoyama, with Midnight. Tokoyami, with me. And Jiro, with Present Mike. From there, everyone split off. Those that were getting one-on-one practice first went over to the teachers, and the rest dispersed among the equipment. Looking around, Izuku planned his route. He would warm up with some stretches, then maybe take a few laps around the track. From there he would try lifting some weights, and if he had time before his turn was called, he would try the rock wall. The solid plan laid out, Izuku stood off to the side near the track, but out of people's way, he started to stretch. Smart boy. Stretching first is beneficial. Nana praised, clapping beside him. Come on, I'll count for you. Izuku allowed it. First sitting and spreading his legs out before grabbing his toes. He was annoyed to see that some of his flexibility had gone along with his muscle. Oh well, he'd just have to work on it. After about 10 minutes, Izuku finished his stretches and stepped onto the track. Okay, my stamina is probably not as good either. So I'll have to take it slower than usual. Midoriya. Izuku tensed as he heard Itsu's voice coming from behind him. Turning around slowly, Izuku saw Itsu running towards him from the rock wall with his hand chopping the air. Izuku seriously debated just continuing with his run, but with Itsu's quirk. He sighed heavily and stood still, waiting for Itsu to catch up. Do you want me to handle him, sweetie? Nana asked. As much as Izuku wanted to say yes, Aizawa's warning rang in his head. When Itza approached, he took a moment to gather his thoughts. Seemingly he had shown up without a plan on what he wanted to say. "Would you mind, if I joined you on your run?" It was not what he wanted to say, but Izuku sensed he was beating around the bush. "I'm not running. Just jogging. I have to rebuild my stamina." "But sure." He shrugs. Stepping up onto the track, Izuku started a light jogging pace. Of course, Itza had no problem keeping up with him. "Midoriya, during my mandatory therapy session, I've come to realize that we weren't exactly fair to you," Itza said bluntly. Which he was right about. "We should have given you a chance to explain yourself." "A chance to explain myself?" Izuku interrupted, suddenly feeling a spark of anger inside. "I have to explain myself to keep my friends from abandoning me." Izuku felt his pace picking up as he used his gathering rage to push himself forward. Itza seemed confused. "Abandoning you? We never abandoned you." "Fine. Pushed me away. Humiliated me. Kicked me to the curb." Izuku seethed. "Whatever you want to call it." Itza stuttered now. "We just needed you to give Azui some space. She witnessed something terrible and it shook her badly. She wouldn't speak, she would barely eat. It was clear running wasn't going to help." So Izuku stopped suddenly on the track, chest heaving as his legs felt like jelly. Itza had run a few paces ahead before he noticed Izuku had stopped. But when he turned around, Izuku didn't hesitate. "You could have told me. You could have sent me a message or invited me to the class meeting. Something. Instead, you all went behind my back. We needed the truth. And you had been keeping secrets from us since the beginning of the school year. Because I barely knew any of you. I know." Itza raised his voice and Izuku froze. Itza never raised his voice like that before. "I realized that in my therapy session. That's what I'm trying to tell you." The pair stood in silence for a long moment, just watching each other warily. Eventually, Itza spoke once more. "You had valid reasons for keeping secrets. I understand that. I'm not defending our actions. I just want to make things right again." Izuku stared at Itza for a moment before letting his eyes flicker to their glowing forms. He could see Itza flinch away from him, but what he was mostly paying attention to was Itza's soul. As if it could tell him if Itza was being genuine. But Itza's soul just looked the same as always. Retracting his spirit sight, Izuku sighed. "I can't just forgive you. You don't speak for the class. You can't take back what was said about me. It was Mineta who said those things. Not us. Azui agreed. "As I said, she barely spoke. I'm sure if she did speak she would have said he was overreacting. But everyone still went along with it. Everyone except Shoji and Tokoyami," Izuku said, looking over to the teacher groups. He was relieved to see that they looked to be finishing up. And Shoji was quickly making his way over. "If we could just have an explanation of what really happened in your own words, I'm sure they would be just as remorseful as I am." Itza stopped mid-sentence as Shoji tossed his arm over Izuku's shoulder gently. "Is he bothering you?" Shoji asked Izuku, completely ignoring Itza. Izuku shook his head. "No, it's fine. I was just about to go try the rock wall. Actually, Mr. Izawa sent me to bring you to the teachers. It's your turn to be paired with All Might." Shoji nodded and Izuku looked over to see All Might watching them patiently. "Oh, I'll make this quick then." Izuku nodded before he looked to Itza again. "Listen, Itza. I don't want to give the class an explanation. At least not yet. I should be able to have secrets without being labeled a zombie freak." The words stung even now and Izuku had to clear his throat to keep his voice from wavering. "Later, Itza." He finished, finally turning his back on Itza and letting Shoji lead him over to All Might. You handled that perfectly, sweetie. Nana praised, brushing against Izuku's hand. What was all that about? Izuku heard number 5 ask. I'll explain it later. Nana brushed him away. Just focus on your training, Izuku. You can do this. Thanks, Nana, Izuku muttered, letting a smile cross his face once more. Chapter 30, One-on-One. Izuku walked up to All Might with a somewhat forced smile on his face. He was excited for the lesson on using his quirk, but the conversation with Itza rained on his parade. Is everything alright, young Midoriya? All Might asked, leaning over to look Izuku in the eye. He spared a glance over Izuku's shoulder, probably looking at Itza, but Izuku just continued to smile. Yeah. Everything's fine. Can we get started? I've been looking forward to this. All Might seemed to sense the honestly in the last statement as he straightened out, striking a pose and flexing. He felt a bit of guilt for brushing aside All Might's obvious concern, but he knew they were pressed for time. Then let's get started. All Might said without much delay. Finally, Izuku mused. Finally, he would get to practice with his new quirk. He hadn't stopped talking about it with Nana and she had thankfully put up with his constant babbling. All Might held one of his hands out in a stop motion as he spoke. Your power draws on the energy around yourself. And when there is none around you, it draws on what's inside. He summarizes what they already knew. But that's changed now, right? After all, it was All Might's hypothesis that One for All could now act as a generator for Izuku to use. We have to see. So, hit me. All Might urged, pointing to the outstretched hand. Give me all you got. It was, admittedly, a bit strange. He didn't want to hurt All Might. Izuku cut the train of thought short. Limited time or no, All Might wasn't weak. And one punch wasn't going to be enough to harm him. Izuku reeled his arm back, trying to pull out the energy he hoped was inside him. He felt the heat rise in his chest, bringing a smile to his face. It didn't burn like he thought it would. It almost felt like pins and needles spreading down his arm. Funneling as much as he could into his arm, he prepared to punch. From All Might's confidence, odds are he could take the punch no problem. He knew his limits. Now it was just up to Izuku to perform. His fist cut through the air, much easier than it would before. He felt the heat gather in his fingers, almost burning now like a meteor striking through the sky. It grew more and more intense until... Stop! Nana cried out very suddenly. Immediately, the power faded. Scorching back the way it came, up to his arm, over his shoulder, through his chest, and into his core. Until Izuku's fist smacked into All Might's hand with a barely there smack sound. All Might's palm was like a brick wall and the force behind the punch reverberated up his hand and into his wrist. Izuku jerked his hand back with a hiss, shaking it out and cupping it close to his chest. What the heck was that? This isn't going to work. Nana interrupted his train of thought. You can't use the power of One for All that way, Izuku. Her voice shook with worry. Sparing a moment to flick his eye over to the hazy scene of the spirit world, he saw Nana standing close beside him, almost but not quite reaching for his hand. What? Izuku gasped. Apparently interrupting whatever All Might had been trying to tell him. Are you alright, my boy? All Might asked instead. Crouching down, All Might held his hand out for Izuku's wrist. "Let me take a look at it." Slowly, Izuku laid his wrist in All Might's much larger palm. "I don't think it's broken," he explained. In fact, he was fairly sure it wasn't. The pain he had felt before was dulling down into a persistent throb. Without being instructed, Izuku started touching his fingertips to this thumb one at a time. All Might watched closely before nodding. Placing one of his oversized fingers in Izuku's palm, he said, "Squeeze as hard as you can." Izuku did so, feeling just a bit of pain but nothing too extreme. "She says I can't use one for all that way." He finally fills the blonde in. "She told me to stop and all the power just disappeared." They both knew who she was and All Might's brow furrowed deeply. "Why would she say that?" "I saw the power inside you, Izuku," Nana spoke up. "It was building up and up. Filling you up and there was so much of it. What's going on over here?" Both Izuku and All Might jumped as Izawa's voice carried over. Looking up, Izuku saw the man making his way over. The student he was with had disappeared, probably to go find the next one. "Is he hurt?" "Not badly. It's just going to be a little sore in the morning," All Might explained. "We were just talking about how the power suddenly faded from his attack. Nana said she was worried because there was a lot of power filling up my strike." Izuku finally took his hand out of All Might's grip and gave it a few experimental twists. "Fine for the moment." Izawa gave a hum. "How much power were you trying to use?" Izuku briefly pondered on what kind of question that was before he answered. All of it?" "I did tell him to give it his all," All Might said nervously with a wince. There was a moment of silence with Izawa giving them both an unreadable look before tilting his head back with what sounded like a very heavy sigh. "We're switching students now." Izuku was surprised as All Might stood quickly. "Right. Yes. Probably for the best. Which student were you working with?" Izuku was starting to feel put off by the nerves All Might was projecting. "Ajiro. Guide him through how to fight a stronger opponent. He has some fighting skill already but take it easy on him," Izawa instructed before All Might suddenly rushed away as if his tail end was on fire. Izuku watched him run, meeting Ajiro halfway and putting on his trademark smile for him. Did I do something wrong? He couldn't help but feel like he had. Izawa waved it off. No, no. He's just worried for you. Every UA teacher does this at least once in their first year. He'll be fine. Wait, does what? Izuku was now thoroughly confused. Izawa's hands came up in a placating gesture. We're pro heroes, Midoriya. We aren't used to training with kids when we get here. We all have a moment where a student gets hurt and we feel like it's our fault. Izawa rests one of his hands on Izuku's shoulder. It isn't a big deal, I'll explain it later. Let's just focus on your training for now. Izuku couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy about it all, but nodded. Fine. The two of them recentered themselves to stand across from each other as he and All Might had done before. Nana was a comforting presence behind him as Izawa began his instruction. Now, your power is new, so you can't be using it like a cannon right now. Your body hasn't had years to adjust like your peers. Start small. He's right, sweetie. Start small. Looking down at his fist, Izuku thought about the feeling of power he felt before. How it pooled into his entire arm. Maybe instead of filling his arm, he could focus on just his fist. Taking a deep breath, he balled his fist up and thought about his power. Instead of trying to pull it from his core into his arm, Izuku visualized it coming directly from his hand. After all, it shouldn't matter where he summons it. Theoretically, there is no one place a quirk is stored. It's in his entire DNA now. A smile came to his face as he watched his veins start to glow with it, electricity cracking between his fingers as he raised his power level just a big. No. Nana cried out again, and just like before, the power was gone. Oh, come on. He had it. Stop trying to take his power away, Shimura. You aren't the Widler anymore. Daigoro scoffed, and Izuku found himself looking to Nana. What is he talking about? I'm not doing it on purpose. Izuku was now getting frustrated. Doing what on purpose? He demanded. I just don't want you to get hurt. And when I see the power of one for all getting too much for your body to hold, I'm not sure. I make it disappear. Nana explains gently. It's not intentional. But I worry for you. I don't want you to get hurt. Izuku quickly waved Aizawa over before quietly explaining what's happening. Well then, Aizawa's eyebrows raised in surprise. Looks like you're at an advantage already. I am. Izuku wasn't sure how no control over one for all was an advantage. If Nana could mess with his power output, how long was it until another spirit could as well? Yes, not everyone has a power reader when they first start using their quirks, and that can be dangerous. But this is a good way to test your limits without actively surpassing them. Aizawa summarized. What about other spirits? Could they? Izuku voiced his concern and watched as Aizawa's eyes narrowed in thought. It was an agonizing wait while he watched the gears turn in Aizawa's head. No. Your connection to her seems strong. That paired with the fact that she used to wield your power leads me to believe that's the only reason she has this ability. Feeling the conversation is over, Aizawa nodded and went back to his starting position. Izuku looked down at his hand and sighed. All right, I'm going to try to funnel in power bit by bit. If I get close to the limit, tell me. Copy that, sweetie, Nana said eagerly. Izuku couldn't help the smile that brushes across his face. There was something amazing about having a supportive presence with him at all times. It was great. Like before, Izuku funneled power into his hand. Slowly, he let the power build up until he felt that it was getting a bit too hot in his hand. There. That's nearing your upper limit. Before the power could fade, Izuku stepped closer to Aizawa and swung. He had no real battle training. Especially not in hand-to-hand combat. He could already see Aizawa stepping to the side of his blow, but he was readying his capture weapon as well. As Izuku went to follow through with the punch, he felt the cool texture of it wrapping around his wrist. But it was then that he felt the power release. With a loud pop that sounded almost like thunder, Izuku felt his wrist become free once more. Yanking it back quickly, he looked to see that the power had created a burst of energy that pulled the capture weapon off his arm, giving him enough room to slip out. Smiling widely, he looked to Aizawa. His cheeks hurt from the size of his smile, but he didn't care. Even Aizawa seemed in good spirits as he had a small smirk. It was quickly hidden as he returned his capture weapon, but Izuku saw it enough to know it was there. Good work, Midoriya. Next time, if you aren't following with another attack, put distance between yourself and your opponent. Understood? It wasn't scolding. It was an actual critique. And it made Izuku so happy to hear that his smile grew wider. Yes, sir. Yes. Izuku found himself looking over to All Might, hoping that maybe the man had seen his attack. But when he looked over, the eyes of more than just his teacher were on him. Not just All Might, but the other teachers as well. And even a majority of the students were giving him wide-eyed stares. The attention made his joy fade just a bit as unease boiled inside. The last thing he needed was to feel even more like a freak than before. He could see Shoji and Tokoyami rushing toward him though, and that chased away the bad feelings. Mostly at least. Shoji's large hand clapped him on his shoulder, and Tokoyami was letting Dark Shadow get very touchy-feely as he smiled. That was an amazing sight, Midoriya. Tokoyami praised. As if that broke the spell, the other students turned back to their teachers and training continued as normal. Aizawa gave Izuku the advice that he should work on his power control and hand-to-hand combat, but Izuku wouldn't forget the compliment from before. He went with his friends over to the gym equipment then and started talking. They had planning to do. Along with his criticism, Aizawa had also made the announcement that they would be having a relay race soon after. A chance to use their quirks in a practical manner besides fighting. Izuku was very excited for it.
Okay, this might be the shortest one, because, other things besides that, what the hell, that's still 1 hour, for God's sake, what the fuck. Okay, alright, please like, maybe, share,